This podcast contains adult themes and graphic violence. Listener discretion is advised.
A commercial-free version of this podcast is available on Patreon for $1 per month. Patreon.com/Beyond Contempt podcast. I'm Renee, and this is Beyond Contempt True Crime. You're listening to episode 52, Rob Andrew. Rob Andrew was born on September 19th, 1962. He was the third born out of 4 boys for parents E.R. and Ellen Andrew in Enid, Oklahoma. Rob had been driven, even from a young age. He was also bright and creative. In elementary school, Rob decided he would be an advertising executive. And that was exactly what he eventually did. In high school, he took interest in a woman named Brenda Evers. Brenda was born on December 16, 1963. She, too, grew up in Enid, Oklahoma, and her family was ardent churchgoers. The Evers spent their free time getting the family together over meals, and they also enjoyed group prayer. It was a simple life and a quiet life. Brenda's friends always described her as being shy. She spent her free time at church and took part in youth group, and she took satisfaction in helping people. Brenda put in a strong effort at school and was an above-average student, often achieving straight A's. The most exciting thing Brenda took part in was baton twirling. She went to football games, but then went straight home while her peers went out to party. While other kids her age were smoking and drinking, Brenda did not partake and stayed home with her family. She was also known to be a conservative dresser. Brenda met Rob Andrew during her senior year of high school. He was in his first year at Oklahoma State University. Rob's younger brother introduced the couple. Even though Brenda was Lutheran and Rob was Baptist, they had a lot in common in that their families had a close connection and placed an importance on religion. Brenda wrapped up her senior year of high school and moved to a Lutheran college in Winfield, Kansas for her freshman year. For her subsequent year, she transferred to OSU because she wanted to be with Rob. Prior to graduating, Brenda married Rob Andrew on June 2, 1984. After college, the couple left Oklahoma and landed in Texas. Rob worked on his career in advertising, and Brenda worked in the finance and banking world. She enjoyed Texas and made good friends there. Rob really wanted to move back home to Oklahoma, so he accepted a job there in 1988. He moved back home, and Brenda stayed in Texas. Their separation lasted a few months, and Brenda finally moved back to Oklahoma as well. On December 23, 1990, the Andrews had their first child, Tricity. Brenda gave up her banking career, which she really had enjoyed, and became a stay-at-home mom who taught Sunday school on the side. A few years later, the Andrews welcomed their son, Parker. Rob had an excellent job working for Jordan and Associates, and the family had a large home in a northwest Oklahoma City neighborhood. During this time, the Andrews family attended many churches. Brenda always had a confrontation at a various church, or had a reason to not like it. Rob remained close with his faith, and in 1999 founded the North Point Baptist Church in Edmond, Oklahoma. The founding of this church left Rob feeling reinvigorated and renewed. He told his friends that he was a brand new person. Rob was still an advertising executive, but pulled back on some of the after-hours whining and dining of clients. He gladly swapped the drinking time for things he valued: family, religion, and community. Under the surface, the Andrews marriage was distressed. Rob was very satisfied with his new direction in life, but Brenda was unhappy with him. She liked him better when he was a dedicated ad exec. On their wedding night, Brenda told Rob that she hated him. He confided in one of his coworkers that Brenda told him she hated the way he ate food, then poured a plate of pasta on his lap. Rob told another friend that Brenda said she wished she had not married him. Rob often talked to his friends and his pastor about the problems he was having with his wife. Meanwhile, Brenda was going through a personal evolution or an early midlife crisis, and she didn't want to live the life of a boring suburban soccer mom. Brenda was no longer that young conservative woman who fastened every single button on her blouse up to her neck. As a 30-something, Brenda was ready to show off her figure. Her clothing selection shifted to short dresses that showed off her cleavage. This got the attention of the congregation at the North Point Baptist Church, where she taught Sunday school. This also caught the attention of another deacon and Sunday school teacher named James Pavatt. James was a life insurance agent and not only sold Brenda Andrew an $800,000 policy, he was also a friend. The pair sometimes hung out and even went hunting. In his younger years, James had been in the Air Force and had spent time in Southeast Asia. After military life, he transitioned into the insurance business and took a job as an agent at Prudential Insurance. Some of Pavatt's coworkers felt he was cold, creepy, and manipulative. He thought nothing about talking about his dislike for dogs. When he saw a dog, he would openly tell his coworkers that he wanted to shoot it. The affair between James and Brenda began in 2001, and they were in a state of limerence. The pair acted like teenagers, with note passing and laughing during church services. This did not go unnoticed by the members of the church. They knew James was going through a divorce. He had filed in summer 2001 to dissolve his 9-year marriage with his wife. Many in the congregation felt that life was tough for him and asked him to take a temporary break from his church duties. Brenda was upset and asked Rob to defend her to the church leadership. She also wanted him to quit the church. Rob did not give in to her demands and was not willing to lie for her. He was aware of his wife's infidelity. The dalliance with James Pavatt was not the first time Brenda had an affair. During their engagement, Rob was driving past a motel and saw Brenda there with her ex-boyfriend. But Brenda Andrew did not believe in divorce, and it went against his faith. So he soldiered on, and they eventually sought counseling, but it never really improved their relationship. Brenda kicked Rob out of their home, restricted his access to their children, and filed for divorce in September 2001, just a few months after James Pavatt started his divorce. Even though their marriage had significant problems, it shocked Rob that Brenda was taking action to dissolve their marriage. On October 26, 2001, Rob received 2 different calls stating that there was an emergency. Brenda was in a hospital in Norman, Oklahoma, and she needed Rob's help. This was a ploy to get Rob to use his car, since the brake lines had been cut sometime the night before. Rob noticed that something wasn't right with his vehicle and discovered the issue. He called the police and reported the finding. Rob explained to the detective that he was going through a contentious separation with his wife. The detective gave Rob some sound advice and told him to take a friend along every time he went to Brenda's house to pick up the kids. Later on, when investigators looked at hospital records, Brenda Andrew had never visited or had been admitted to a hospital. Law enforcement also discovered that the person who called Rob about the emergency was a woman named Jana Larson. She was James Pavatt's daughter, and her father talked her into placing that call from an untraceable phone. This incident was a wake-up call to Rob, and his mind went straight to the life insurance policy that he had purchased. He called James Pavatt and wanted Brenda removed as the beneficiary. Rob insisted that his brother be put on the policy, and he would hold the money in a trust for Rob's children. Pavatt told him that Brenda owned the policy, and he could not change the beneficiary. Rob felt that this information was incorrect and went up the chain at Prudential. He called James Pavatt's supervisor, who reassured him that he was the owner of the policy and he could change the beneficiary. Rob told the supervisor that he was worried that his wife and Pavatt were trying to kill him. Eventually, James learned Rob went over his head about the policy and firmly warned Rob that he better not get him fired from his job. Brenda and Pavatt had forged a change of ownership document for the life insurance. They signed Rob's name and backdated it to March 2001. Rob kept a spiritual journal, and on November 20th, 2001, he made the following entry. I should walk with assurance of the things I hope for, a relationship with my kids, a loving relationship with family and friends, a home that worships, laughs, and plays and loves. Stay faithful. His entry seemed upbeat, and he was in a decent place, despite the situation he was in. Rob was supposed to pick up his kids for Thanksgiving weekend. For some reason, he disregarded the detective's advice and didn't bring a friend along when he went to Brenda's house. As Rob sat in his car and waited for Brenda, he was on his cell phone talking with a friend. Brenda opened the garage door, and Rob ended his call. He walked into the garage to help Brenda with the furnace as there was an issue with the pilot light. Not long after, gunshots were heard by Brenda's neighbors. Brenda placed a call to 911 at 6:20 p.m. She said, "I've been shot. My husband and I, we've been shot." Brenda said 2 masked intruders dressed in black had shot them. When emergency services arrived, they found Rob Andrew on the garage floor. They attempted to save him, but Rob had lost too much blood and could not be resuscitated. Brenda was shot in the arm, but her injury was superficial. They took her to the hospital for treatment. Many of the witnesses who observed Brenda thought her behavior was not matching up to the seriousness of the incident. She was very calm, given that her husband had just been shot in cold blood. James Pavatt went to the hospital that night and was seen talking with Brenda. Their conversation seemed easy and light, given the circumstances. Brenda had an interview with police, but didn't really give them any usable information. She was very vague and only gave simple details about the masked intruders who shot them. She claimed Rob was shot at a distance. Once law enforcement started investigating Brenda's background, they quickly uncovered some concerning facts. They discovered the incident report that Rob had placed with police about his car brake lines being cut, and a suspicion that his wife was behind it. They also realized that Brenda was having an affair with James Pavatt, the insurance agent who attended the same church as the Andrews. Their affair was certainly no secret among the congregation. Law enforcement learned about the life insurance policy and believed that this was the motive behind the crime. During the murder, the Andrews kids were watching TV in a bedroom with the volume on a high setting. They were not packed up and ready to leave, which was strange given that Rob was picking them up for the weekend. There was nothing missing from the house, and Rob's wallet was still on his body. So Brenda's intruders, dressed in black, failed to take anything from the home. We're going to take a quick break to hear from our sponsor. Thank you to Hunt a Killer for sponsoring this episode of Beyond Contempt True Crime. Life can get so busy with work, podcasting, needy dogs, that I feel like I never get to chill out and spend quality time with friends and family. Hunt a Killer is a fantastic way to do game night that gives us the opportunity to have fun and investigate crime without even having to leave the house. And you probably already binged all the true crime shows on Netflix like I did. After watching The Worst Roommate Ever and learning about how terrifying Jameson Bachman was, I turned off the TV and channeled that energy into solving a murder. You too can put your skills to the test and channel that energy into trying Hunt a Killer. Hunt a Killer isn't just about solving a murder. This game tells an immersive story, the same kind of stories that I cover on my podcast. You learn about the backstories for each of the suspects, their complicated relationships to the victim, and watch everything unfold as you complete each episode. What I appreciate is part of the proceeds for every box goes to the Cold Case Foundation, an organization that is dedicated to helping with real-life cold cases. Right now, you can go to huntakiller.com/beyond and use the code BEYOND for $10 off your order. Again, that's code BEYOND for a $10 discount. Now, back to the show. When the medical examiner conducted the autopsy on Rob Andrew, it was determined that he had been shot at 2 separate angles with a 16-gauge shotgun. The first shot was fired a few feet away from Rob, and the second shot was at close range. This did not match Brenda's interview. They conducted gunpowder residue testing on Brenda's sweater, and it showed that she was shot at close range, since there was a ring of gunpowder residue where the bullet entered her body. Blood spatter analysis was conducted on Brenda's jeans, and gave police an idea where the shooters were standing. They were pretty certain that Brenda had fired that second shot. Police found a shell casing in the garage. A 16-gauge shotgun is not a typical firearm, and Rob did own one, but it was kept at Brenda's house. She did not allow him to have the gun back after the separation. When police searched Brenda's home, they could not find the 16-gauge shotgun, and they never found it during the investigation. When police spoke with witnesses, they stated that they saw Brenda at her family's rural Garfield County home target practicing a week prior to the murder. Officers found several 16-gauge spent shell casings at the site of the target practice, which verified the witnesses' claims. Law enforcement figured that Rob bent over to look at the pilot light of the furnace. Then James Pavatt walked up behind him. Rob turned around and was shot in the abdomen. He tried to grab something to block the gunfire and picked up a garbage bag full of aluminum cans to cover up. Brenda took the gun from Pavatt and shot Rob at close range in the chest. She then took a .22 caliber pistol, which was a gun with lesser firepower, and shot herself in the arm. There was a .22 caliber bullet in the garage wall and a 16-gauge shell casing on top of the minivan. Pavatt had purchased the .22 caliber pistol from a local gun shop a week prior. On the day of the murder, Pavatt borrowed his daughter's car under the guise that he was going to have it serviced. He returned the vehicle the next day, but the car had not been touched. She also found a .22 caliber shell casing on the floor of the car. Pavatt told his daughter to throw away the casing and revealed that Brenda asked him to kill her husband. He threatened his daughter that he would kill her if she ever told anyone. Police searched the home of the Andrews' next-door neighbors, the Gigstads, because someone had been in their attic. However, there had been no signs that anyone forced their way into the home. Someone walked through the Gigstads' bedroom closet, which was the entryway to the attic. They found 16-gauge shotgun shells on the floor of the bedroom and .22 caliber bullets in the attic. Dean Gigstad and his wife had been out of town at the time of the murder, but Brenda Andrew had a key to their home. The .22 caliber bullets in the attic matched those found in Pavatt's daughter's car. The 16-gauge shotgun shells in the Gigstad's bedroom matched the ones in the Andrews' garage, and ballistics analysis determined that they were likely fired from the same weapon. After the murder, Pavatt added his daughter, Jana, as an authorized user on his checking account. He also had her remove his furniture and possessions from his apartment. Brenda transferred money from her account to Jana's, then asked her to wire that money back to them once they left Oklahoma. Pavatt asked his daughter to help create documentation and forge Rob Andrews' signature, which gave Brenda the legal permission to take their kids out of the country. Pavatt took to the internet to research countries that did not have an extradition agreement with the United States. The day prior to Rob's funeral, James Pavatt and Brenda Andrew fled to Mexico. They took their Andrews children with them as well. Rob Andrews' funeral took place on November 26, 2001, and 700 people paid their respects to the charming, funny, intelligent man that always made his friends laugh. One minister who was running the service did not want to begin because he noticed that Rob's family was not there. Police were still crafting their case, but this event was confirmation of guilt. When police went to arrest Brenda Andrew and James Pavatt, they discovered that they were long gone. While on the run, Pavatt called his daughter several times and had her send money. The FBI got involved in the case and figured out Pavatt and Andrew were being helped by his daughter. They convinced her to cooperate, and along with local Mexican law enforcement, figured out their location. In February 2002, Andrew and Pavatt ran out of funds and came back to America. They were arrested at the U.S.-Mexico border. Rob Andrew's family had concerns when they heard Tricity and Parker Andrew repeatedly state that they wanted their mommy's family. The children had been brainwashed. Eventually, after therapy, both kids were doing better, but were never able to talk about the night their father was murdered. Rob's family did eventually get custody of the children instead of Brenda's sister. James Pavatt's trial began on August 25, 2003. His daughter, Jana Larson, testified that Brenda asked her dad to murder Rob in October 2001. She admitted to placing a call to Rob from an untraceable phone and claimed that Brenda was in the hospital. Pavatt's ex-wife testified against him, even though she still deeply cared for him. She felt that when James was in love with someone, he would do anything for that person. She had been married to James, right until the point he was planning Rob Andrew's murder. The divorce threw her for a loop, and it was like he pulled the rug out from underneath her. First, he told her the reason he wanted the divorce was because he couldn't get along with her family. Then he changed his reasoning and said it was for her own protection because of his time spent in special forces. Pavatt said that Korea was the safest place for her. So she went to Korea for a while, but when she returned to Oklahoma City, James Pavatt had changed. Previously, he had been a kind and compassionate person while they were married. But upon her return, she felt that there was something not right about him. They tried to reconcile, but it never worked out. On November 25, 2001, he borrowed his ex-wife's 1992 Chevy Beretta and fled the country with Brenda and her kids. Pavatt admitted to the affair with Brenda, but denied that he killed Rob Andrew. He claimed that he just got caught up with Brenda and suffered from guilt by association. The prosecution claimed that there was a confession letter written by Pavatt to Tricity Andrew, but experts determined that this letter was a fake. On September 16, 2003, James Pavatt was found guilty of first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit first-degree murder. A few weeks later, on October 21, 2003, they sentenced him to death. Brenda Andrew's trial took place in summer 2004. The prosecution laid out a simple motive. Brenda killed her husband for the insurance money so she could be with her lover, James Pavatt. They would use the $800,000 payout to start their new life. She wanted this so badly that she murdered Rob Andrew when the children were in their home and even shot herself in the arm to make her intruder story believable. Many people verified Brenda disliked her husband and openly talked about it. She even used the phrase, "I hate him." Church pastors testified that the Andrews had a healthy amount of marriage counseling, as Brenda had several relationships outside of their marriage. She had affairs with Rick Nunley, who was a family friend and engineer, and James Higgins, who was an area grocer. Nunley met Brenda through his ex-wife, since they worked together at a bank. The Andrews and Nunleys had been friends for a decade. The affair between Rick and Brenda started in October 1997 and only lasted 6 months. When Pavatt and Brenda were picked up at the U.S.-Mexico border, she called Rick Nunley to help organize communication with her sister and her attorney. James Higgins said Brenda would show up to the grocery store in provocative clothing and would flirt with him. One day, Brenda was very forward and handed him a hotel room key. She was frank with her pillow talk and told Higgins that she wished her husband would die because she wanted to move on from him and wanted to move on with money. Their affair went on for a while, but ended in May 2001 when she was bored with the tryst. They remained friends, and he even did renovations on the Andrews home. Brenda then moved on to having an affair with James Pavatt, who was Rob's insurance agent. They uncovered that Brenda also purchased an insurance policy on James Pavatt. and his attorney speculated she was planning to get rid of him as well. Brenda's lawyers tried to place the blame squarely on James Pavatt's shoulders, but the jury saw past it. They found Brenda Andrew guilty of conspiracy to commit murder and first-degree murder. On September 22, 2004, they sentenced her to death. At this hearing, she said that her sentence was an egregious miscarriage of justice. Brenda claimed she was an innocent woman, wrongfully convicted. Brenda stated she was a loving, gentle, and compassionate mother, and that God-fearing people who celebrated her death sentence were sick. A few jurors showed up for the sentencing out of reverence for Rob Andrew. They were unmoved by Brenda's claims of innocence, given all the evidence that was presented at trial. It did not surprise the prosecutors that Brenda lacked remorse even after her sentencing. She was flippant and arrogant, even in the face of being sentenced to death. James Pavatt went through the appeals process, and his death sentence was overturned in 2017. However, the U.S. Supreme Court reinstated it in 2019. He ran out of appeals in 2020. Once Oklahoma resumes their executions post-pandemic, Pavatt, who is in his late 60s, will be eligible to be put to death. He's housed in Oklahoma State Penitentiary in McAlester, Oklahoma. Brenda Andrew appealed her sentence in 2018, and the courts denied it. Brenda is housed at the Mabel Bissett Correctional Center in McLeod, Oklahoma, and she is the only woman on Oklahoma's death row. Rob's co-workers and family remember him as being a charismatic and loving person who cared for his wife, despite how inconsiderate she was to him. He was always smiling and never said a bad word about anyone. Rob enjoyed building people up with positivity. His co-workers remembered how spontaneous he was, especially when he declared July 11th as 7-Eleven Day and bought the entire office slushies. He also named his daughter Tricity and joked that if she ever ran for office, her catchy slogan could be, "Elect Tricity." Tricity and Parker Andrew are reportedly doing well, and Rob's insurance money was placed in a trust that they can both access when they turn 35. Both children have not maintained a relationship with their mother. Thank you so much for joining me for this episode of Beyond Contempt. Please visit beyondcontemptpodcast.com for the links to the sources and music used in this episode. Research, writing, editing, audio production, and sound design were performed by me, Renee. If you like the show, please leave me a positive review on Apple Podcasts. Before I sign off, I have a promo that I need you to hear. A friend of mine launched a really fantastic true crime show, and the show is called Crime Trials. Please take a listen.
Hi listeners, I'm JT, your host for Crime Trials. We are an investigative true crime podcast examining the depraved minds behind the most heinous acts of malice. If you like documentary-style true crime shows with immersive primary source audio, straight from the courtroom, then we are the show for you. We break down motives, evidence, and legal strategies behind past and current high-profile criminal trials. We take you into the mind of the defendant through direct and expert testimony. We review the pre-trial motions and discuss the most compelling evidence introduced at trial. We also cover the evidence deemed too prejudicial for the jury to hear or consider. We explain the legal arguments behind those decisions and discuss how it might have changed or influenced the verdict. Join us at Crime Trials on your favorite podcast player of your choice.